Good evening and welcome to yet another Southwest Africa webinar. Thank you for joining us. If you are joining us for the first time, then the question that we ask week in, week out is, where have you been? This is a journey that started 6 months ago when Southwest Africa took a bold move to go virtual for the first time in 24 years. And since then, this platform has been used to educate, to engage, to inspire, and to excite. If you're feeling a little left out, please don't despair. Do visit our website where all past and forthcoming events are stored for your convenience. Today's topic, application of design thinking. Take that again. Today's topic, application of design thinking in steering innovation for relevance and societal impact. Now, many innovations fail to create social impact due to lack of involvement of targeted beneficiaries. Given that design thinking emphasizes on empathy, invention, and iteration, its adoption in creating social innovation can help in reversing this trend. In this presentation, the application of design thinking in the creation of ITIKI is explained. ITIKI is an integrated system that combines weather data with the traditional knowledge of African farmers to predict drought. ITIKI stands for Information Technology and Indigenous Knowledge with Intelligence. It sends farmers drought forecast via an app or an SMS message. The forecasts are also accessible through a web portal, emails, and audio files, acknowledging that the main driver of ITIKI is the local people's knowledge on drought. 3 design science tools were applied in the entire innovation process, leading to a high rate of adoption in Kenya, Mozambique, and South Africa. Now, this presentation is going to be given to you by Prof. MUTHONI MASINDE. Prof. MUTHONI is an associate professor and head of IT department at the Central University of Technology, Free State, South Africa. She holds a BSc, an MSc, and PhD computer science degrees from University of Nairobi, the Free University of Brussels, and University of Cape Town, respectively. Among her accomplishments is the development of ITIKI, a drought prediction tool that taps into indigenous knowledge on natural disasters. Masinde is an NRF-rated researcher with over 60 scientific publications and has supervised several postgrad students. The applied nature of her research has also attracted social innovation funding, such as being recipient of the USAID funding under the 2017 Secure and Food, Water for Food program. It gives us a pleasure to be hosting Prof this evening, and I just want to hand over to her. And as she's going to be presenting, please do send through the questions that you might have. Let's engage with her. This platform is built for you. And let me just encourage those that are watching us from Facebook to share the stream and also comment and ask your questions, because we will be monitoring that platform too. Prof. MUTHONI, thank you very much for accepting our presentation. And I'm now just handing over to you.
Thank you very much, Freddie. I almost feel like you've done the presentation from the introduction that was very generous, as well as the profile of the presentation today. I'm greatly honored for this opportunity. I always embrace such opportunities to share what I believe in, what I've been doing for the last 10 years, because you never know when you change someone's perspective to science, to life, and everything that goes with it. So that's the title of the presentation that was clearly read out. And I would like to make the presentation in the following sequence. I'll first give an introduction of the presentation. And then I will talk about the value of IKS, the Indigenous Knowledge Systems. I'll link that to how does it connect to innovation, and explain how you can now embed the use of design science into IKS to come up with innovations that are impactful. The whole presentation is anchored on what I've been doing here at the Central University of Technology in Free State, the ITIKI drought prediction tool. So for a start, I always like to start with this because it changed my life. Among my other things I've done also, I took off from the core science and went to do MBA. And that's why I came across these quotes. They say that most first-class students, especially when the matric results are announced early next week, the first-class students will end up becoming doctors and engineers. The second-class students will end up doing MBA and will become the administrators. And the third class go to politics. They are the ministers. It's a joke. The ministers, because we have brilliant ministers, so that I have to emphasize this as a joke. And they rule both the first class and the second class. And lastly, the ones who would make it to qualify will go to the underworld and sell drugs and mark people and take control of everyone above. The reason I give this joke is the theme of today's talk. If we stick to the core science, the engineering and the doctors, with a fixed frame, without thinking about the people for whom we are creating the product, then we fail to create the impact. And with that now, I did mention that the scope of the presentation, I will keep giving examples of what we focus on is usually the farmers. And we do know the farmers create the backbone of the economy, especially in other African countries. They are the breadwinners, and 80% of the food produced there is by the small scale farmers. The context is that despite the massive information being generated today, I'm sure by the time we finish this conversation, most of us will have received tens of WhatsApp messages. Our Facebook account will be flooded with messages. But in many cases, to discern what is important and what is not important, it's drowning all of us. And that is so true for the small scale farmers. There are so many apps that you can use to check for weather, but whether that can be usable to the farmers, the answer is obvious. Most of the times, no. And hence today's presentation. But before I go into innovation, for the benefit of those of us who may not have read about IKS, though it's a very well preserved domain here in South Africa, including funding that is specifically done to support indigenous knowledge systems. And what a better example than today's presentation that is focusing on IKS. So IKS is nothing than the local knowledge. When you wake up in the morning and check through your window, you more or less know your environment, sometimes better than South African Weather Service. So you know that when that cloud is forming on that side of your house, it will rain shortly. That's local knowledge. Indigenous knowledge, sometimes it's called traditional knowledge, or in some texts you'll find it being called folk knowledge. It's a knowledge I'll pass on to my daughter. My daughter will pass it the same to her children and so on, and I received the same from generation that came before me. That's indigenous knowledge. And any systems around them then become indigenous knowledge systems. From my experience of the research I've been doing, I can confirm that IKS is one of those things we can use to pass on or to implement the African Union statement that says, we want African solutions to African problems by African people. And in my case, I extended by saying, one way of doing that is extending the use of IKS. So to say, we would like to go back to the roots, and we can be applied in many domains, including medicine, like we all know. The reason is that since time immemorial, our people have used this to cope, especially with climate variabilities. So we shouldn't abandon it. We should embrace it, clothe it, using, of course, the modern science so that it can be conserved better. And we can use it to stop what I call, I first read it from a famous author called Hicks in his article he wrote in 2002. We keep transferring northern designs to our reality. if for example, when you go to church, the Catholics, in December, we celebrate the birth of Christ, and they show us snow. But in South Africa, at that time, we are melting in the heat. So we keep transferring the North, the things that were designed for the North to our realities. And many times it doesn't work. What a better way of stopping this than embracing our very rich IKS. And South Africa and Africa at large, they present unique opportunities. It's not always challenges we have opportunities that we can embrace. And in today's presentation, we're saying that solutions for combating climate-related problems like drought must incorporate implicit elements about us, about our status quo, so that we can transfer our cultural beliefs and mutual learning, hence the social impact that we so much want to achieve. I'm moving on to just an example, this is a typical call that was on the NRF 2 years ago. The support is phenomenal. They support many elements of IKS, including women and IKS-based technology innovations. And me as a researcher, I'm benefiting from such. It just encourages us to know that the government, the funding agencies do support this form of knowledge. So what is innovation? And how do we eventually link it to IKS? Again, for example, from OECD definition, I underline this word deliberately. It's implementation. As long as what you're thinking of still sitting in your mind, it's not innovation yet. But the day you implement it, be it a product, be it a service, a different way of doing things, a different ways of marketing, a way you can change where you work, that's innovation. As long as it's new and it creates impact at the place. In the context of today's presentation, how do we define innovation? How do we know it's working? It's based, we need to ask ourselves, do we understand the problem? And we describe it. And if we can describe it, do we understand the domain where it's going to work? If I'm going to produce a vaccine, for example, for example, the government spend time understanding the domain so that when we do start implementing it, it's contextualized to that environment. And again, I keep saying these are not my words. I provided citations of where I found them. And especially in this particular article, then we end up with 4 types of innovations. We can have what we call sustaining innovation, breakthrough innovation, disruptive, or just basic innovation. And put in a matrix format, it would look something like this. So it's a spectrum. How well do we understand the Africans that need the farming tools or the decision supporting tools? And how well can we describe the problem they're facing? If we understand it very little, then we end up with just basic research. However, if we can define the problem using books, but don't spend time with the people, then we end up with breakthroughs, and they are not very sustainable. If we understand the problem a little and the domain a lot, so it means we haven't read the book, so we really don't understand the farming system, then we end up with VC models, venture capitals, which mostly sometimes people just want to make money. But if you understand both, then you end up with sustainable or sustained innovation. Innovation that if you're not there tomorrow, it can continue functioning. And this is where design thinking comes in. So I also wanted to find out, we keep talking about innovation. We read about innovation. If you search about innovation right now, you will be overwhelmed by how much information you'll get. But I've been using the fact that big funding agencies, for example, European Union and the Horizon 2020 protocols, they always include this as what they are looking for. The proposal you've written, does it engage with the societal factors? It's very specific. You don't just bring something blue sky kind of thing and drop it somewhere in Limpopo and then expect people to use it. They want to see that you're engaging with factors that are relevant to those people. They also look at, even when you're doing the actual research, are you doing it with them so that they can become for them? So they look at the exchanges that you're doing. And I can assure you, okay, this I learned because a number of times I've played a role of an assessor or expert to evaluate these proposals. This is so critical that people who do not include the society in their research proposals don't get funding. I know for innovation expert, there are many ways of assessing it. I was just putting it here in the context of what the presentation today is all about, the society. So then, how do we use IKS to innovate? Again, if you search books, you'll find very many answers. My theory or my thesis, my argument is that contextualized innovations built by, with, and for the local people have a higher chance of succeeding. And one way of bridging that gap, there are many other ways. My way is using IKS to bridge that gap, because you end up with something that's culturally appropriate and locally relevant to them. So we can then use that to blend different types of innovation. There are different types of innovations, and they are all important. It could be the STI kind of innovation, the technology-based innovation that is, or the ones that people learn by doing, by using, and by interacting. Again, theories, these are not my theories. I've provided a citation, and people can, audience can always check. But today we didn't want to read about theories. So at this point, I wanted to explain how we and myself and my team managed to use IKS and design science to come up with the ITIKI. And I wanted to play this audio so that another voice can speak on my behalf. It's a feature that was aired on CNN about ITIKI. I'll play it now. Thank you.
In association with Dangote Transformational Projects.
Farming remains a pillar.
In association with Dangote Transformational Projects.
Farming remains a pillar of most economies in Africa. The majority of production comes from small farms that heavily rely on rain. So if it doesn't rain, the farmers have a problem. They need to prepare and minimize the negative effects. MUTHONI Masinde is a computer scientist in South Africa who created a website and mobile app that warns farmers about looming drought conditions.
I grew up in the village, and I noticed that the farmers in the village do not have any form of science to tell when to plant or even where to plant and when. So they use indicators that they watch or they sense in the environment. They watch insects, they watch behavior of animals, and then they make a decision. I think it will rain in 2 weeks' time, so they prepare their land.
The tool combines ancient African knowledge with scientific data, for example from weather stations, to come up with predictions. Masinde has partnered with the South African Weather Services, the universities of Free State and KwaZulu-Natal. Today, the project is recruiting a group of community liaison officers to collect knowledge from the local farmers. Masinde says the app has been a great success. It's currently being used in 3 African countries by over 10,000 farmers, the majority of which are in Kenya, where Masinde is from, but also in Mozambique and in South Africa.
The first one is the information they're giving to our local scale farmers.
The mother of 4 has been invited to speak internationally, and she's won numerous awards for her work. Her project has received funding from both the South African and American governments.
They managed to avoid what many researchers go through. We call it innovation valley of death. Come up with innovation, dive into the valley I never come out, but I got out of that and I can stand on the rooftop and say, I made it.
In association with
Thank you. So with that, at least I'm able to explain how ITIKI works. And especially for me, if you read about Innovation Valley of Death, it's where scientists come up with innovations and then it doesn't translate to a product. Luckily for us, this is an operational business. CUT, my university that is, we created a spin-off company for which myself and two other colleagues directors. So we are moving to the direction of commercialization. So design thinking. So then now I can explain how it was created. Like Freddie read, it's a methodology that embeds the full spectrum of innovation activities on human-centered design ethos. So in other words, you design this product with the users, by the users, and they test it iteratively. At the end of the day, it's something that works for them. It's based on 4 things: human-centeredness, like it says in the definition, possibility-driven, options-focused, and iterative. Again, this is well-researched topic. I picked up from one of the authors that the paper I read. How does design thinking work? In a minute or two, I just wanted to play a video where this professor explains design thinking. And it's our approach that we use to do ITIKI, if you allow me.
In this first session, I really want to explore the definition of design thinking. I want to explore what design thinking really means, or at least what I think it means. It's a term that is somewhat controversial, particularly the thinking part, since, as you'll learn as we talk more about it, this approach to decision-making is about a lot more than just thinking. So what else is it about? Well, let's start with a popular view of the creative process. I call this view the Moses myth. In the Moses myth, innovation is a miracle that results when a special person raises his or her hands to God. The Red Sea parts, the iPod is born, pick your own utopian outcome, the message is the same. It's that innovation takes a special gift, one that most of us just don't have. Like most myths, this just isn't true. Of course, there are creative geniuses. No one would want to deny that truly extraordinary minds, like Steve Jobs, exist. But genius is not the only way to produce innovation. And believing the Moses myth undermines managers' confidence in their own abilities. And what I want to do is just ask for equal time to tell a different version of the story of innovation and where it comes from. This is a view of the creative process that was offered by an employee of Apple a few years back, and it is one of my favorites. Not because I agree with it, but because I think it captures the Moses myth beautifully. That old story that innovation is a black box, it's a hopeless tangle, and the ability to think creatively is a mysterious one that belongs to a special class of people. In this class, we are going to respectfully disagree with that story and tell a different one. Rather than waiting for Moses to show up and part the Red Sea for us, we are going to figure out how to build bridges to cross over to the other side, to that promised land of the new future, so that we can reliably manufacture our own miracles. So let's look at a different view of the creative process. In this view, the tangled mess morphs into a systematic series of questions. The first, and there you have it. Just 4 questions that will help us build the bridge to more innovative solutions and manufacture our own miracles without relying on Moses.
So that's it. For corporate reasons, I just wanted to confirm that I followed that course. It's an online course and got myself a certificate for understanding design thinking. I acknowledge the source of that video. So then with that in mind, we set out to develop ITIKI, to develop a highly accurate, affordable, forecasting tool for Africa's small-scale farmers, and with the aim of boosting their yields, incomes, and resilience, especially to climate change, and enable them make better cropping decisions. So you'll notice that how do you understand what is accurate to me may not be what accurate for the small-scale farmer. So we went about asking ourselves those questions. What is the current situation? What if we did this? What works? What doesn't work? And we iteratively ended up with a product that works for them because they were involved in the development. And in our case, we had an agenda. We wanted to know to what extent, if we involve the community 100%, to us, that was a success. And the assurance that the tool will be acceptable to them and adoption won't be as high as it can be. So we followed the design process like the professor explained. We listened to them, we had sessions with them, define what the problem is, come up with prototypes, let them test those prototypes, and then repeat the process. For example, what works in Mozambique will definitely not work in KwaZulu-Natal, where we have some farmers. What worked in Kenya would not work in South Africa because they perceive things differently. Their IKS system is completely different. And it's only when you contextualize to them, then they accept it. So we ensured participatory community-driven through brainstorming, storytelling, and the prototypes, and repeated launches so that we see which one works, which one doesn't work for which people. These are some of the pictures we took. This is the one on top left here was in Kenya. This one was the recent one, March last year in Swaimane in KwaZulu-Natal. And this one was taken in Mozambique. Some of the questions we listen to stories like, in one case, they say if there are many boy child born, it would indicate good rain. If there are many types of fruits in a particular season, it means good rain. Again, interpretation of that for sure, I would divide from one group of people to another. These are more pictures. Some of them, the three of them, we took them in Limpopo. We're currently working through the South African service to see that we can download the same system, downscale it for use in some places in Limpopo. Then some of the prototype we started, I used to like this one. This one, we launched it almost 9 years ago. We've been moving to reach a level where now we want to include also market prices, because the farmers say, if I have a product I want to sell, I would like to know where I can get the best price in my own language. And this is an example, it's a live system. We do send farmers SMSs in their language. I wanted to show this one because it was very interesting. This was sent to the farmers in Kenya just before the onset of rain last year. And in this language, it says that the rain will be suppressed. When they say suppressed, it's in their language they understand. If you use the modern language, you saw them, tell them the rainfall will be near normal, they won't understand. But you tell them in their own language that the rainfall is little in their own language, and tell them don't plant maize, you need to plant sorghum and cowpeas and green gram, something like that. And the interesting thing, because my mom is a part of this system, interesting is that the way they say a prophet is not known at home, my mom actually didn't follow it. So she went ahead and planted her maize. And when I talked to her in January, she was saying, oh my word, she really didn't harvest anything. But the ones who planted millet and cowpeas, they have bumper harvest. This is how important it is. You can differentiate between a harvest or no harvest. In some cases, can differentiate between life and death, poverty and riches, because it's talks to them in their language. These are some of the numbers we calculated because we collect data faithfully. How many people use the tool before they harvest and after they harvest, how much in they harvest. And in some cases, like in Kenya, we have huge number of farmers. Some, on average means some had more, others and lower. They got yield increase that reached over 14%. And what more would we ask for an adoption of a tool that uses our knowledge to reach our farmers? In conclusion, we have many challenges, not just the farmers. We're now faced with COVID-19. In some places, locusts are still invading the farmers. So there are very many problems. So we can still use IKS in those domains as long as we use design science with the people. Don't go to the office, develop it and deliver it at their desk. Work with them. It's an interesting that I preach this gospel to my students also. You don't just sit at your desk and read about Swaimani. Go there, visit them 3 trips. Recently, one of my students visited and they could not drive anywhere. It was raining. The terrain is nothing you've ever seen. Even a 4-wheel drive pickup could not rescue them. But at least now they know what they're talking about. They know the farmers they're developing the tool for. And that's what design science helps us to do. So when you do that, then we can say you're an innovator. We is someone who looks at the world and notices a hole in it. She thinks, we understand why I'm using she, thinks to herself, this thing, this idea, this service, this kind of a person should exist to fill that hole. At that time, you're not thinking it's me. So there's this problem, I think someone should solve it. Then she sits for a while thinking about who's going to solve that problem outside my house. And then she stops waiting and starts creating that thing herself. She becomes the person she was waiting for and create the thing. That's what I did. And watch my mother struggle with, how do I know when it's going to rain? So then, you know what? Let me make a contribution. And that came in form of ITIKI. And because imagination is the highest form of research that ever takes place. Be in a quiet moment, think about it, and you'll become an innovator. So do you want to create innovations that are relevant to your people? IKS, intertwined in design thinking process, is one, not the only one of the tools. And today I confirm to you that it works. Thank you very much. Freddie, over to you. And I will take any questions that may arise. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much for such an inspirational presentation, which really speaks to our ability as communities to solve our own problems, to start thinking of ourselves as solutions and capable of coming up with solutions. That was really, really inspiring. May I just ask that those that are watching here on Zoom, if you do have any questions that flow from this presentation, please feel free to post those in the Q&A. We will be monitoring them, and Prof is here and ready to answer them. If you're also watching on Facebook, please be sure to also post in the comment section. Our team is monitoring those platforms as well, and surely we will engage your question. Prof, thank you once again. There is a question that is coming here, and it says, with a world that is changing at a faster rate than before, how do we ensure that the use of IKS is relevant to the conditions we are living in today, since IKS is generational knowledge? Over to you, Prof. I do see that she has frozen a little bit on my side. Prof, can you hear me? I think you might be muted, Prof.
Yes, I can hear you, Freddie. Sorry about that.
Not a problem. So should I repeat the question? Should I maybe repeat the question?
I think it's something to do with how do we ensure that yes, please.
Okay. So it does say, with a world that is changing at a faster rate than before, how do we ensure that the use of IKS is relevant to the conditions we're living in today, since IKS is generational knowledge?
Okay, friend, I have a question now. I think it's a misconception that Indigenous knowledge is indigenous, or it's a big debate. It does not mean it's old. It actually means localized. I'll give an interesting example. It's not in my domain. For example, people who want to boost their immune system, they tend to make concoctions of natural plants. That's local knowledge. The fact that I know I need to mix lemon with garlic and so on is local knowledge. So it's never irrelevant. The kind of knowledge we are talking about today is never irrelevant. But however, in some cases, we need to blend it with modern science to make sure that you can bridge the gap. ITIKI is actually a bridge. We use both knowledge systems. So if I use a sensor device, combined with what the farmer is saying regarding a particular insect they saw, we compare the two. So they complement each other very well. So it's not necessarily obsolete. Thank you, Freddie.
Oh, okay, perfect. Thank you. Another question: did you find that it was easy for the older generation to grasp the function of ITIKI, since it had elements of, IKS? And I think it also speaks, where you could also expand this question to speak to where people are illiterate and are not able to read. I do know not that, there's audio functions with ITIKI, but I just wanted to know the relationship that the users had with ITIKI. Did they appreciate it more? Did they understand it more just because it was related to indigenous knowledge systems?
Definitely yes, because if we start off by telling them that the star, they have a local name for each community, the particular star has been spotted 2 days ago. So immediately they relate with it. So they say, oh, the star, because they have always known about the star. But then it goes ahead now to give them richer information, more than just the star, because South Africa and the service have provided that information. So they relate with it for sure, 100%, because it relates to the knowledge they already know. On the question of the challenge, because now you're talking about indigenous knowledge and a smartphone at the same time, that can be contradictory. So that's why we use SMSs, like you correctly said, and sometimes we use audio files. We've moved to a step further. It's still a challenge because some of them will get the SMS and they won't read it. My mom will wait for this daughter-in-law or the son to read for her. So we are doing research with South Africa Service to see if we can extend it. We can use the youth as a bridge. Like in KwaZulu-Natal, what we've done, we recruited 10 youths who can become like intermediate with their uncles, with their moms, with their aunties. So it's still a challenge. So it's a very relevant research problem today. Thank you.
Yeah. This is just a question out of interest, really. And do you find that the adoption of ITIKI is also going to large-scale farmers, or is it still really used in, these rural small-scale farmers? And the reason why I ask is to really start to think of, the scale that we can go to when we are using indigenous knowledge systems. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Of course, it works because the needs of a large-scale farmer and the needs of a small-scale farmers are comparable. They would like to know when to make particular decisions. But the reason why we deliberately chose small-scale farmers was because they're extremely vulnerable. When it doesn't rain, the large-scale farmers has an insurance cover. The small-scale farmers is between him, her, he and her God. So, but the answer is yes. The scale is it can be adopted. It's even easier with the large-scale farmers because then you can put things like sensors. The cost then becomes non-issue. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. And just to our viewers, we have removed Prof's video just to try and save her bandwidth. The internet was a bit shaky there, so please do just bear with us. But she is here to answer all questions. Please keep them coming, and we will surely address those. There is another question here, and it's really speaking to the innovation value of death. And the question says, how can we increase community-based innovations, especially in environments that lack resources? So resource is a big issue, especially when it comes to, small communities that lack, but which have solutions. Yeah. You're muted, Prof. If you could.
Sorry. In my assessment, we are doing it big time. Like the government is putting a lot of funding in IKS. I know about it. The former Department of Science and Technology used a lot of money to support those innovations. But what we think we need to do is get out of the box. It's a baby step of ensuring that if today I want to create a solar-based charger for the phones, talk to those people. In my university, for example, they came up with an innovation for using solar to charge phones. But then we didn't think about the fact that the moment we take the solar chargers to the users, some of them would want to take them for themselves, source it to steal. But had we worked with them, they would have seen, they don't steal what belongs to you. So it looks like a small baby step, but involving the people will make them respect what belongs to me. I will not steal it. I will even nurture it. But I think the government is doing really good work in promoting this. Thanks, babe.
Yeah. And perhaps, governments all over the continent can start, following suit. Just, I think in the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned that South Africa is really forward when it comes to this. And yeah, props to them. And let's hope that many other governments might see value and, put money where value is. An interesting question really coming, and I'm trying to go there so that we can see it. It says, let me see. Okay, there we go. It says, does more boys being born really in a year really mean more rain? And how do you decide whether you will include this as a variable?
Wow, it's interesting that was picked. What we do, we try to use indigenous knowledge that is very close to but things we can explain, botanical things, zoology things. So those ones, they look like me. It's difficult to computerize them. So in our models, we listen, but if we can't explain it clearly, we don't put it in the model because we will need to use them to predict. So we use those ones. For example, when they say a particular tree has flowered, it's easy to relate that to the science, the botany that we know. Some of them, for example, they used to say, they would go to the forest. I've visited some of those, but then when you reach the beginning of the forest, they don't let the women to go in. So they do some rituals there. We respect them highly, but since we can't computerize them, we don't touch them, but I'm sure they're of great value. So it's part of the storytelling. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think, have you seen, you just mentioning storytelling as part of, playing an instrumental role, have you seen that to be important in also transferring this indigenous knowledge from generation to generation. I think my question is really to say, who are the custodians of indigenous knowledge systems, and what is the most effective way to transmit it from generation to generation?
The local knowledge belongs to the people. In fact, one of the reasons why most of these innovations fail is you go harvest the knowledge, go back to the cities and forget about the people. Even government policies here prohibit that a lot. It's not a lot, it's not acceptable. What we need to do is take the systems to them, let them store it for themselves. At least it's a hierarchy because not all of them can read. At least there are those who can read. Let them use the apps to store the information, but really belongs to the community. They have structures there, they have elders, they can continue building it. When it comes to passing it on to the young people, it's a big problem at the moment, because the youth have gone to the city, they don't want to be associated with it. So a project like ours then can be used to conserve that knowledge, so it can be found tomorrow. Different projects can come up to conserve different type of knowledge, but always ensure the community remains the owner of that information. Freddie.
Yeah. Powerful. I guess we're going to just take, the last questions. Well, it's the last question that I have on my side. If you do have a question, please do, submit it so that we might be able to address it. It says, do we need science to back up IKS? For instance, during this pandemic, I personally saw information regarding herbal medicine that can relieve symptoms, but then someone knowledgeable would say it's not backed up by science.
Yes, initially that's the biggest problem we had with our research, because I started off when I was doing my PhD at the University of Cape Town. One of my supervisors is a meteorologist, and he would dismiss it for the same reason. What you can't prove, we scientists don't want it. But we've gone ahead, two students, PhD students under my supervision, we've created models that we can prove. It's very easy to prove indigenous knowledge that's related to climate, because there are some biological things that make the frogs make the noise. There are some reasons why the dragonflies are flying higher or lower, something to do with humidity. And you can actually compare when it's here, the humidity is higher or lower. When a particular tree, like for example, the trees that produce smaller size mangoes, they tend to have more fruits when there's a drought, but the ones that produce big mangoes thrive when there's more rain. It's very easy to explain. It's an adaptation. So we've gone ahead and produced proofs for some of this, so it can be proven.
Another question just quickly coming in. I think it's coming from Facebook. It says, how do you computerize indigenous knowledge so it can be integrated with technology? And I guess, also, there's this notion that when you take indigenous knowledge systems and you put it into a computer or an app, it ceases to be indigenous knowledge. We can spec to intellectual theft. They talk to intellectual theft a little bit there, but I'm keen to know, so that it lives on and we can effectively pass it from generation to generation. And I think a project such as yours is one good example of one good way of doing that.
No, thank you. No, it's an extremely important question. Luckily, being a computer scientist, so we've learned models, data structures, so to say, that you can use. So in our case, we use something they call fuzzy cognitive maps. So you set rules that say if, stuff like that. At the end of the day, the fuzziness, because it's not an absolute truth. When the farmer says it will be a better season, you cannot use a number to put better season. So we found models. We use VASI cognitive maps based on VASI logic, and I didn't want to go through those ones today. Then at the end of the spectrum, the focus that are coming in through numbers, the South African the service kind of focused, and the ones that are coming from indigenous knowledge, then it's possible to reconcile them. In some cases, and this is where design science comes in, there's sometimes when they are not agreeing. What the indigenous people are saying and what MET people are saying kind of differ. Our experience, 9 out of 10 from a local scale level. When I say local means a village, the local knowledge is correct. The indigenous knowledge, the science is not. It's not because they didn't do a good job, it's because they are based on sparse weather stations. So when someone says, I look at my phone now, it says it rain in Bloom, but Bloom is big. If I check through my window, I'm bound to get more accurate information. So the complement of the two, I keep saying, is the power of the ITIKI that I was talking about today. Thank you.
Yeah, powerful, powerful. And I'm happy to see in the audience that we had Prof. Edmondson, and he, also works with some of these, space and weather stations. And it is really encouraging to hear that, those two should work together. I do not have any questions that I have on my side anymore. Maybe let me just take this opportunity to thank you so much, Prof. I think this has been such an exciting and inspirational presentation and talk. Really saying to young girls and also local people, saying your knowledge is valuable and you can come up with solutions that are, life-changing from local knowledge. And that is really a powerful statement. And to say, innovators, when we innovate, let us have design thinking at heart. Let us have the people at heart so that we can create solutions that are for the people and can be utilized by the people. Really, really powerful. Thank you, Prof, for your time and for the knowledge shared. And I would really want to thank you that we're here with us watching. Really, this session would not have been the same if it was me and Prof. So thank you very much for spending your time with us. And let's take the message out to say innovation coupled with design thinking. Let's take the message out to say there's innovation such as ITIKI. And I guess this is how we really start to create these, communities of that are informed scientifically. Thank you very much. Please do log on to our website and so that you can see upcoming events and stay connected. Really, we want to see you. We do have events that speak to adults. We have events that also speak to your children. So please log on to our website, which is updated on a weekly basis. And I'm sure you are sure to find something that you'll be interested in. From myself here in the Free State, and I understand Prof is in the Free State. Thank you very much for joining us and good evening.